Minister for the Cabinet Office, I call Minister Pennybourne to answer the substantive question number 1 from Dr Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 1, 2 and 3 together. We have been working closely with businesses to help them adjust to any new requirements for trading with the EU. Monthly ONS trade figures have shown that exports to the EU have rebounded strongly and have been above average monthly 2020 levels.
Right, let us go to Dr Philippa Whitford. Philippa.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. But on top of the impact on our local fishing fleet, Brexit is driving businesses to move operations to Europe. Foxglide, a sportswear company, isn't just facing shipping delays and having to pay VAT on the materials they import, but due to rules of origin, also now face tariffs on the garments they export to the EU. So does the Minister accept that, contrary to the Prime Minister's claims, the deal does not deliver tariff-free trade and is damaging local economies?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that particular case, and as she will know, we are always happy to talk directly to businesses or through their members of Parliament to see what we can do to help their particular circumstances. But all the issues she raises, my noble Lord Frost is working through, and of course we're setting up new structures to work with our counterparts in the EU, as well as the opportunities we have with Member States to resolve these matters.
Let's go to Anne McLaughlin. Anne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But UK trade exports to the EU fell 23% in the first quarter of the year, compared to 0.8% to non-EU countries. It's clear to everyone that this is a consequence of the Tories' Brexit deal. Everyone, that is, except this government. Will the Minister finally accept that her government's deal has harmed exports? In other words, harmed business in my constituency, in her constituency, and right across these islands?
I do not accept that. Businesses have had to contend with a huge amount, and they have done a tremendous job to get this far. There are remaining issues, but on the trade figures, as I said in my opening remarks, they have rebounded. They're actually above average levels compared to what they were in the beginning of last year. And what the Honourable Lady does not refer to is the 63 trade deals that we have done elsewhere in the world, and that will bring huge opportunities for businesses in her constituency and across the UK.
Mr Speaker. 5 months ago, I raised with the Cabinet Secretary the case of a local business who are facing significant problems importing from Belgium, I do believe. They are now reporting a doubling in time before products arrive, significant extra costs and significant extra red tape. These aren't just teething problems. Isn't it clear, Mr Speaker, that the TAC requires whole-scale dental treatment, starting with a far closer alignment with the single market, starting with an urgent veterinary agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary rules?
Well, I would be very happy to look at any cases that honourable members raise. We can put them in touch with the subject matter experts to work through what mitigations we can bring in, also what financial support we can give them, and make sure that they are accessing those schemes. As I say, my noble Lord Frost is very focused on these issues. We have done a huge amount of work with businesses directly, but also through their trade bodies, and we're also going to be bringing forward new support for them as we go further, to give them the bespoke advice that they need.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In February, I raised with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster the issue of Wild Mode, a company in my constituency, and the increases in shipping costs they had had. In the last week or so, they have confirmed they are still being quoted around €1,000 to ship in from Poland, when pre-Brexit it was effectively zero. So let me ask the Minister, what concrete action is this government going to take to resolve these problems, to end that uncompetitiveness, or to mitigate these massive Brexit-driven cost increases?
Well, in addition to the work that my noble Lord Frost is leading on, which the Right Honourable Gentleman will be aware of, and also the financial support we have put in place, we are also monitoring what businesses are being charged, whether it is through particular trader support services, or whether it is through particular aspects of the supply chain. We are monitoring those costs, and that is factored into our work and the work that Lord Frost is taking forward.
Sure, Jose.
Monitoring's fine, but we need action. So let me raise the issue of another business, ATL Turbines. They bring into Scotland to repair turbine parts from around Europe and the world. They have told me their post-Brexit admin costs are now 10 to 15 times greater than they were last year. They cannot use the revenues post-VAT accounting processes. They're encountering significantly more shipping errors, not just costs. And most damningly, they have said that while the high-level structure has been put in place, the details of how it works in practice are basically non-existent, where it is falling short. Cost increases, administrative burdens, shipping errors, no useful guidance. When will this government finally take seriously these issues? And would it not be better to admit, finally, that the truth is for business, Brexit isn't working?
Well, I have been doing a large amount of work with Lord Frost on looking at what advice and support is there for business and what their needs are. And they do need, at this stage now, more bespoke support. And we are standing that up and putting it in place. And we will be informing members of this House about that in short order. What I would also say to him is that as well as mitigating the difficulties that we are having as a nation to work through, we also want people to maximise the opportunities as well. Those trade deals that I refer to represent £217 billion worth of business. That we want all businesses across the UK to be maximising, and we will be providing bespoke support for businesses to do that in the future.
Patrick Grady.
So number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following the ratification of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, we are working with the EU to set up the Partnership Council, the Trade Partnership Committee and the specialised committees that form part of the treaty infrastructure to ensure that new trading arrangements are implemented and are working effectively.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, I think from the testimony we heard at the Joint Select Committees yesterday and the answers we've had today, we know the government is just in complete chaos on all of this. It went into Brexit with its eyes wide shut. Isn't it the case that once we're clear of the COVID pandemic, the chaos and true cost of Brexit will become clear?
Well, I would gently say to the honourable gentleman that Lord Frost and his team are working through these issues. We are just, next month we will be hopefully having the first Partnership Council, and those structures will be stood up. So we will have other methods where we can work through these issues. But when Lord Frost goes into bat on those issues, it would be helpful if members of this House would stand up for all nations of the United Kingdom in those negotiations and get behind him. I think that would improve our chances. But we're not relying on that, Mr. Speaker.
Successive question to Minister Go.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will take questions 7 and 8 together. On the 12th of May, the Prime Minister confirmed to this House that a public inquiry into COVID-19 would be established on a statutory basis with full formal powers, and it will begin its work in spring 2022. And further details will, of course, be set out in due course.
Let's go to Afzal Khan. Afzal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, I visited the covered memorial wall opposite Parliament to remember those I have lost to this crisis, including my mum and both my parent-in-laws. Yesterday, bereaved families like mine watched in horror as Mr. Cummings detailed the litany of failures and gross incompetence right at the heart of this government, which the proposed statutory inquiry will no doubt examine in much more detail. Given the importance of this inquiry to bereaved families, will the Minister agree to meet with me and representatives from COVID-19 bereaved families for justice as soon as possible to ensure their voices are heard?
Well, first of all, can I pass on my condolences to the Honourable Member for the sad loss of members of his family. And I know that the whole House will want to pass on sympathies and condolences. So many people have lost those dear to them. That's why it's so important that at that inquiry we make sure that the voices of victims are heard and that their questions are answered properly and fully.
Let's go to Rachel Maskell. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The healing won't start until the public inquiry begins. Yesterday's Select Committee's damning evidence clearly caused significant pain to grieving families. They need answers now to know if decisions by this government could have avoided the death of their loved ones, including the 396 families in my city of York. Does he understand why the commencement of the public inquiry must not be delayed until next year, especially following yesterday's evidence? And will he bring that forward so bereaving families first are consulted over the scope of the inquiry, but also have their questions answered?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes an important point, which is that a statutory inquiry is obviously the right way to make sure that all the right questions are asked and that full answers are arrived at. But in making sure that that inquiry works, the experience, the voices, the views of those who have suffered so much must be a critical part in making sure that it's set up appropriately.
Shadow Minister Jack Drummond.
Mr. Speaker, I beg your pardon. Mr. Speaker, Jane Roach from Erdington tragically lost her father Vince and her sister Jocelyn within 5 days of one another last April. This devastating loss has driven Jane and thousands like her to be a tireless campaigner for justice for those who lost their lives. Following on from the exchange just now, does the Minister agree that it is absolutely imperative that the public inquiry has the full confidence of the relatives who are grieving to this day? And will he therefore commit to ensuring that the bereaved families groups are fully consulted on who is the chair of the inquiry and on the terms of reference for the inquiry? And finally, will he commit to the Prime Minister meeting personally the COVID-19 bereaved families? They want to meet with him. Will he meet with them?
Well, again, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising the case of his constituents who've suffered so much and who understandably want to make sure that the inquiry provides them with answers at a time of grief and contributes not just to the healing process, but also making sure that appropriate lessons are learned. And I look forward to working, as everyone in government does, with victims groups in order to make sure that the inquiry can command their confidence.
Alexander Stafford. Please.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 10, 11, 12 and 13 together. The government is committed to the relocation of 22,000 roles from London to every part of the United Kingdom by the end of this decade. It's all part of our Places for Growth initiative, and it will ensure that the civil service is more representative of the communities it serves, bringing more diversity of thought into policy making. The Cabinet Office has recently announced our second headquarters will be located in Glasgow, and it's also the case a number of other departments have announced their plans to increase their presence across the UK. Just last week, the Home Office announced there will be 500 new jobs in Stoke-on-Trent, and Bayes announced that 865 roles were now relocating to 6 locations across the UK, including Darlington.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that I've been fighting for the decentralisation of the civil service to the north, particularly to my constituency of Rother Valley. The Leader of the House responded to me positively on this only last week. So will my right honourable friend assure me that the civil service jobs relocating to northern areas will be high quality, high powered roles rather than simply backroom processing positions, which I fear would be a purely cosmetic change and would not constitute a real shift in the power of the north? And can I invite him to come to Rother Valley to discuss those opportunities and all new job opportunities in Rother Valley?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point, and it is absolutely critical that the jobs which are relocated include those in the senior civil service responsible for decision-making, and areas like South Yorkshire and his constituency not only provide a very high quality of life for individuals, it's also important that the talent that is there is deployed at the very heart of decision-making. And I hope to be able to visit Rother Valley in order to see my honourable friend and others in his constituency next month.
Members shouldn't walk in front of members during the question. Can we go to Alicia Kearns? Alicia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's levelling up agenda will transform our nation. But does my right honourable friend agree that we can't deliver this agenda unless we level up both cities and rural areas like Rutland and Melton? So can I invite him and his officials to visit the rural capital of food, Melton Mowbray, to see why nowhere in the country makes a more compelling offer for a DEFRA office and the Transformative Places for Growth programme than Melton, and why this would show the government's commitment to these Midlands and to rural areas?
Well, Rutland and Melton couldn't wish for a more effective advocate than my honourable friend. She, I know, talked to my colleague Lord Agnew and myself in the Cabinet Office just last week in order to press the case for a relocation of jobs to Melton. It has a superb agricultural college. It's at the heart of our food-producing countryside. It produces superb products, and it also has many of the facilities, logistical and otherwise, which would recommend it to government departments, and I look forward to working with her on the prospect of relocation.
Let's go to Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of Stoke-on-Trent, Kidsgrove and Tork, I want to thank my right honourable friend, his colleagues in the Cabinet Office and the Home Secretary, the former Stokey and Kiel University graduate, for passing our litmus test on the government's commitment to levelling up, delivering over 550 high-skilled and well-paid jobs by making Stoke-on-Trent the second home for the Home Office. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this major investment from this Conservative government shows that the people of Stoke-on-Trent will never be forgotten or taken for granted again, as they have been previously?
One of the regular features of the last few months has been the near daily popping into my WhatsApp, email and SMS box of messages from my honourable friend pressing the case for Stoke-on-Trent and for the relocation of senior civil service jobs. And can I say that his persistence and advocacy have paid off, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has recognised that Stoke-on-Trent, an amazing place, is absolutely the right home for the second Home Office HQ.
Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now here comes my pitch. My Stourbridge constituency is the jewel of the urban West Midlands, full of talent and ambition, and some may say it is the perfect location for any future proposed civil service moves outside of London. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that, of course, Stourbridge should be top of the list, and, of course, the Cabinet Office would be more than welcome to locate there?
Well, I'm tempted to say that it's rather like the judgment of Paris. In choosing between Stourbridge or Wolverhampton or Walsall, it's almost as though one's choosing between three beautiful divines or deities. And all I would say is that Stourbridge is a fantastic location, not just for future government jobs, but also for the private sector. And it is part of a West Midlands undergoing a revival with new energetic members of Parliament like her, and of course a re-elected Metro Mayor in Andy Street.
We have a substantive question to the Minister from Dave.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 14, 15, 16 and 17 together, if that's okay.
Let's go to Dame Angela Riedel. Dame Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3.5 million people in the UK do not have the type of ID papers which this government have deemed suitable to allow them to participate in a vote. So what is the government going to do to ensure that people will not be denied their basic human right to take part in a democratic, free and fair election in the UK by these government changes?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady makes a very important point. It's integral to our democracy that everyone has the chance to vote and to have their voice heard. And research commissioned by the Cabinet Office shows that 98% of the electorate already hold an accepted form of photographic identification. And for those who do not currently, a free local voter card will be available from their local authority.
Let's go to Ellie Reeves. Ellie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bromley wards in my constituency were part of a voter ID pilot in 2018, and the council's own figures suggest that 154 people were turned away from polling stations because of the requirement for ID. If this was scaled up nationally, the overall figure disenfranchised would be huge, and the Equality and Human Rights Commission say it would disproportionately impact ethnic minority communities and older people. Yet there were only 33 allegations of voter personation at the 2019 general election. Can the Minister not see the huge disparity here?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes an important point. It's incumbent on local authorities, like her excellent local authority in Lewisham, to work to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to vote. And I should say, because her question gives me an opportunity to do so, in recent local elections, not just for the Greater London Assembly and the London Mayor, but across the country, those who work in local government, returning officers and others, did a sterling job in challenging circumstances. And I know that as we introduce reforms in order to ensure the integrity of the ballot, that local authorities like hers will be at the forefront of delivering those changes.
Let's go to Zara Sultana. Zara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister once said, and I quote, "If I am ever asked to produce my ID card as evidence that I am who I say I am, then I will physically eat it." So why the change of heart, Mr. Speaker? It's not because of evidence of voter ballot fraud, because just 6 cases were confirmed at the last election, while millions of people risk losing their vote because they don't have photo ID. Might it instead be because the Conservatives want to copy voter suppression tactics used in the USA, disproportionately disenfranchising Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities, Gypsy, Roma, traveller communities, working class people, trans people and young people, all groups less likely to vote Conservative?
Minister.
We're not seeking to emulate America, we're seeking to emulate the Labour government, which introduced a form of photographic identification for voters in Northern Ireland when it was in power. I should say she made reference, of course, to working class people. Overwhelmingly, working class people now are much more likely to vote Conservative than Labour.
Right. Can I come to Shadow Minister Cat Smith?
The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster knows fine well that there was evidence of voter personation in Northern Ireland, which is why we needed to see a change in legislation there. But he also knows that there's only been 4 cases of convicted electoral personation in Britain. So with £4 million of taxpayers' money already down the drain with testing this policy, that's £1 million per conviction. I've got to ask him, does he think this is really a good use of taxpayers' money?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Cat Smith.
I have to really question whether or not he thinks that is a good use of taxpayers' money when there are people waiting for mental health beds up and down this country. I have to ask him whether or not it's the government's priority when we have children needing to catch up on their education that they have been denied over the past year. This money, if you want to spend it on electoral matters, why not get the 9 million people that are not registered correctly in this country registered on the electoral rolls, allow them to use the vote and consider introducing universal voter registration?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes 2 important points. It is the case that obviously as we emerge from COVID, concentrating on recovery in public services is important, and she's absolutely right to say that not just in mental health but also in the NHS and in education there is work to be done. But fundamentally, the integrity of our democracy is an important issue. And as she knows, and as she's been reminded by my honourable friend, the member for the Constitution and Devolution, the Labour Party's own internal democracy depends on the production of voter ID. And I think, you know, we will, you know, facts are tools that win a ding, as we say in Aberdeen. And I think on that basis, we are delighted to be emulating Labour Party policy in this regard, at least.
We have a substantive question to Minister Milling.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will take questions 20 and 21 together. Small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of our UK economy. That is why it's vital that we're making sure that the power of government spending supports this vital sector, both as part of the economic recovery from COVID-19 and our levelling up agenda. We are increasing opportunities for SMEs in a variety of ways, and our measures are working. These measures include breaking up contracts into smaller chunks, transparently publishing contract pipelines, and removing complexity from the bidding process. Additionally, our new social value model explicitly allows greater weight to be given to those bids which help drive post-COVID recovery.
Let's go to Sally Ann Hart. Sally Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hastings and Rother Federation of Small Businesses has highlighted the need for small business-led levelling up. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure that the small businesses, like in places like beautiful Hastings and Rye, have opportunities in public procurement processes in line with a rebalancing of local economies?
I thank my honourable friend and agree that SMEs play a vital role in our levelling up agenda. We want to see greater variety of companies deliver government contracts from every corner of our country. I'm sure our new social value approach will mean more opportunities for SMEs and social enterprises to win government contracts by demonstrating the full extent of the value that they would generate, not just economically, but also taking into account the additional social benefits that can be achieved from the delivery of contracts.
Greg Tracy.
Mr. Speaker, in its last report, the APPG for Women and Enterprise found that women-owned businesses added 115 billion to the UK economy, despite only securing about 5% of government and public sector contracts. So what more can government do to encourage these more female small businesses to come forward, to apply for the contract, and then have the confidence that they have an equal chance in the procurement process?
I want to thank my honourable friend for everything that he does as the chair for the APPG for Women and Enterprise, and share his concern that SME owners of all backgrounds should be benefiting from investment that government contracts bring. We're doing more than ever to encourage all SMEs into public procurement, including those owned by women. Government spending with SMEs is also continuing to rise, with 26.7% of the 58 billion spent by the government in the 2019-20 going to SMEs.
We have a substantive question to Minister Gill.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 22, 23, 24, 25 and 26 together. Levelling up is at the heart of the government's agenda to build back better after the pandemic and to deliver for citizens in every part of the United Kingdom. The government's going to publish a landmark Levelling Up white paper later this year, and it will set out bold new policy interventions to improve livelihoods and opportunity in every part of the United Kingdom.
Let's go to Darren Henry. Darren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Levelling Up agenda set out by this government will ensure that long-forgotten communities across the Midlands are finally getting the investment they deserve. Levelling up in order to regenerate our town centres and high streets, support individuals into employment, improve local transport links, and invest in local culture will have a hugely positive impact across our country and within my constituency of Broxton. Does my right honourable friend agree that having the HS2 East Midlands hub in Towton is the only choice in line with the government's agenda to level up the East Midlands?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point, and he's a brilliantly effective advocate for Nottinghamshire and the people that he serves. And indeed, investment in HS2 is critical to levelling up. The case he makes for Towton is one that I know resonates in the Department for Transport, and I will make sure that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is aware of his dedicated advocacy for this particular outcome.
Let's go to Sir David Everett. David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's action so far on the levelling up agenda to spread opportunity across the UK in order to support jobs, businesses and economic growth. However, can I urge him to pay special attention to the underachievement of working class boys, many of whom are not reaching their full potential. In particular, it is absolutely essential to ensure that people who work in the civil service come from all walks of life.
My right honourable friend, as ever, is spot on. As well as being a brilliantly effective advocate for business, he's also someone with a distinguished former career in education, particularly in further and technical education and advancing the careers of young people from working class backgrounds. And he's absolutely right, we need to do more in the civil service, as the recent Social Mobility Commission report points out, echoing points that he's been making for some time.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the Levelling Up Fund and the transformative difference it can make to constituents like mine in Highburn and Haslingden. But does my right honourable friend agree that this is only a small part of our Levelling Up agenda, and it's important that investment in local transport infrastructure continues, such as looking at the scope of freight terminals and the reopening of railway lines?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and Accrington and Oswald Twistle couldn't have a better advocate than the honourable lady, and she is absolutely absolutely correct to point out that we need not just new investment in improved rail, and indeed my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has been reversing some of the beaching cuts, and more to follow, but also making sure that local bus services and other transport routes are invested in, and I know that she is a particularly passionate advocate for improving local bus services as well.
Dr James Davies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's very welcome that North Wales is set to benefit from the UK Government's levelling up agenda. But will my right honourable friend confirm what actions he's taking to ensure that it benefits not only the region as a whole, but also areas of particular localised need?
Well, I'm looking forward to visiting North Wales, and I hope my honourable friend's constituency later this summer. And one of the things that I do want to do is to make sure that every aspect of levelling up, not just macro infrastructure projects, but also the micro projects that contribute so much to making communities cherished and attractive, are part of the Levelling Up Fund. And I look forward in particular to working with local government in North Wales in order to make sure that our funds are spent as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Cornwall has been recognised for decades as one of the most disadvantaged parts of our country. So can my right honourable friend confirm that Cornwall will be at the heart of the government's levelling up agenda? And can he say what plans the government have specifically to invest in the Cornish economy and the jobs of the future?
Well, my honourable friend will know that the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care was in Cornwall earlier this week, and he spoke from Cornwall at a cabinet meeting, emphasising the vital importance of investment not just in improved healthcare in Cornwall, but also in making sure that jobs and opportunities for people in Cornwall were extended as well. So the message is already being heard in the heart of government, but his continued advocacy for Cornwall makes the point that while it is perhaps one of the most beautiful parts of the United Kingdom, it also contains areas that desperately need government investment and support, and private sector investment and support for citizens to flourish.
Number 27, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I will just turn to this page. It is already government policy to adopt and to encourage greater transparency in its commercial activity, and of course central government buyers must publish all their qualifying tender documents and contracts with a contract value over £10,000 on Contracts Finder. We recognise and regret, however, that there have been delays to publishing some COVID-19 related contracts, and teams continue to work on publishing them all as soon as possible.
Mr Speaker, 72% of COVID-related contracts awarded between February and November 2020 were reported after the 30-day legal deadline, with £7.4 billion worth of this total reported more than 100 days after the contract was awarded. In comparison, it took Ukraine, which was trying to deal with a major conflict at the same time, less than 1 day to publish information on more than 103,000 COVID contracts. So, Secretary of State, I appreciate that Good Law Project, Every Doctor and other activists have taken the government to the High Court, which has confirmed that the government has acted unlawfully. But is it because of incompetence or because it's so imbued in cronyism that this government lags so far behind on transparency? And when will all public contracts finally be published?
Well said. Yeah.
All contracts will be published, and as I mentioned earlier, we're doing our very best to do that. But I'd say two things. The first thing is, of course, that he talks about cronyism. There's no evidence of that. What there is evidence of people in the public sector and in government working incredibly hard to make sure that PPE and other goods were there at the front line. So I'm sure on reflection he'll consider that particular choice of language might need revisiting. On the point he makes about the Ukraine, one of the things that, of course, the Department for International Development and others have been doing in the past is making sure that we invest in civil society capacity in the Ukraine. I'm delighted that the Ukraine is making strides forward, but that's partly thanks to the work that was done by my right honourable friend when she was Secretary of State for International Development, working with others.
Anderson, the Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said in the last Cabinet Office oral questions that transparency drives everything the government does. But research taken by Transparency International has found that 20% of the UK's PPE procurement between February and November last year raised one or more red flags over possible corruption. There's too many secrets. Will the government now restore public trust and publish all communications between ministers and their business contracts over these PPE contracts? Will they publish the details of all the contracts that were awarded in the VIP lane and end the secretive emergency contracting?
Well, the emergency contracting procedure to which he refers is one that was used by every administration across the United Kingdom, including the Labour administration in Wales, and that was because of the pressures that all of us were under. And I remember frontbenchers from the Labour Party, quite rightly, pressing us at an earlier stage in the pandemic to move even faster in order to secure that PPE. But of course, even as we were moving more quickly to secure it, there was a 7-step process supervised by civil servants in order to make sure that procurement was handled appropriately. If there are any specific cases that the Honourable Lady has where she feels that the process was faulty, I'd look forward to hearing from them. But so far, there have been no specific charges from the Honourable Lady, just a broader and welcome emphasis on greater transparency overall.
Right, substantive question to the Minister.
Yes. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer question 30 from the member for Oxford West and Abingdon. Oh, has she withdrawn? No, my apologies then. Oh, it's 29. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was leaping ahead. I've been having lots of discussions with relevant stakeholders on apprenticeship targets. We must do much better in getting more apprentices into the civil service.
Let's go to Robert Halford. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend consider ensuring that all new recruits to the civil service are offered apprenticeships? And will my right honourable friend also make certain that, unless for specific related reasons, all government sector employment contracts have at least 5% of employees as apprenticeships before they are offered any contract by government?
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and we're currently reviewing, as part of preparation for new procurement legislation, exactly how we can ensure that there are a higher proportion of apprenticeships in contracts that government allocates, as well as making sure that the civil service itself extends the use of apprenticeship schemes, of which he has been such an effective champion.
Another substantive question. Leila Moran.
Number 30. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. The Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests publishes an annual report setting out the work he's undertaken.
Let's go to Leila Moran. Leila.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Home Secretary said on the Andrew Marr show, and I quote, "I think at this stage, this isn't about breaking codes or things of that nature. We're all just getting on in government, doing very difficult jobs, actually. But given the ministerial code sets out an overarching duty of ministers to comply with the law, would the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster agree that even if a minister does have a difficult job, they should follow both the ministerial code and obey the law?"
Well, that seems to be a very good point, yes.
Andrew Jones.
Question 31, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer question 31 now. The pandemic must be a catalytic moment where we use digital transformation to sharpen up how we deliver services to citizens and drive leaner, more efficient, and indeed more insightful government.
Andrew Jones.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for that answer? The past year has accelerated the digital marketplace very significantly, and people are much more familiar and comfortable with doing business online. And from a government perspective, the efficiencies and service resilience have been obvious. So will my right honourable friend ensure that all departments across government focus upon improving digital access wherever possible, focusing upon the simplicity and security for users, but also in the back office where significant savings may be made?
Well, he's spot on, and he's absolutely right. Both that the digital transformation of government should make it easier for citizens to interact with government, to receive services quickly, everything from the renewal of passports to making sure that they can book appointments. But it's also the case that back office functions in government can be, through the effective deployment of GDS's superb cadre of civil servants, made even more efficient. This is a cause he's championed quite rightly, and I hope to work with him in the future in order to make sure that we do even more.
Substantive question to Minister Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government and the Office of Veterans Affairs is committed to delivering the Veterans Strategy, and by doing so will establish a gold standard of care and opportunity for veterans in the UK. We will address historic issues which have negatively impacted some groups of veterans, and we will ensure all veterans are celebrated for their skills, courage and their magnificent contribution to our national life, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Deanna Davison. Deanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a real pleasure to hear from my honourable friend at the dispatch box for the first time since he took his place. Will my honourable friend join with me in thanking all of our veterans who've committed their lives to protect and defend us, and who we'll always owe a debt of gratitude to? And can he confirm that it will be the government's unwavering ambition to ensure the UK will become the best place in the world to be a veteran, whether you reside in Brighton, Buckie, or indeed in Bishop Auckland?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I can absolutely confirm that that is our ambition, and I look forward to publishing the updated Veterans Action Plan later this year, Mr. Speaker. And can I, Mr. Speaker, also put on record my thanks to the magnificent work that my honourable friend does in Bishop Auckland to celebrate the important role that veterans have in her community.
Yeah. We now come to topicals. Minister Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I had the opportunity to talk to the First Ministers of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in order to advance plans for a meeting with the Prime Minister to discuss the vital importance of COVID recovery. I was grateful for the constructive work across the United Kingdom, but that conversation, mentioning it here, gives me the opportunity, which I'm sure the whole House will want to share, to thank Arlene Foster for her leadership as First Minister of the Northern Ireland Executive. Arlene will be stepping down shortly. She's a lovely, wonderful person who's done an amazing job. She's a brilliant advocate for the people of Northern Ireland, and I know that we will all wish her very well for the future.
Right, let's go to Christine Jardine. Christine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've all heard this morning already of the importance of levelling up in our COVID recovery. But in constituencies like mine in Edinburgh West, it's also important to reinforce and remind people of the strength and the support that's available from the UK government. So does the Minister agree with me that it's vital that we remain focused on that and on recovery and do not get sidetracked by the SNP's damaging obsession with independence?
Well, the Honourable Lady puts the case absolutely right. We do need to focus on recovery, and it was good to hear the First Minister yesterday in our conversation stress that she appreciated that was a priority. And I know that people in Edinburgh West completely find the arguments that she's been making compelling, and that's why her colleague and friend Alex Cole-Hamilton secured more than 50% of the votes, first preference votes in Edinburgh West in the Scottish Parliament. Obviously a different party to my own, but a reflection of the fact that he and she are they're really good local representatives.
William Ragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that following yesterday's Wagnerian-length committee session, the proper place for learning from the pandemic will be in the independent public inquiry announced by our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister? And given that the chair of that inquiry will require the confidence of the nation, not least this House, would he agree that that chair should be subject to a pre-appointment scrutiny hearing by the relevant select committee?
Minister.
I'm a great fan of Wagner, but I also recognise that the young tenor voice of my honourable friend as chairman is one that deserves to be heard in the debate about how the inquiry should go forward, how exactly that voice is heard and amplified, and as part of which chorus will be a matter for the whole House, I think.
Let's come to Shadow Minister Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster to our first exchange at the dispatch box, but I only wish that it was under better circumstances. The testimony that we heard yesterday has left families across the country wondering why their loved ones, what happened to their loved ones and how they died, and all of us fearing that the government hasn't learnt the lessons or taken the action needed to prevent more avoidable loss. The Chancellor once said he had reluctantly but firmly concluded that this Prime Minister was not capable of leading the party and the country the way he would have hoped. The Chancellor knows the Dominic Cummings very well as his former Chief of Staff, better than anyone else in this House. Does he believe him to be a credible and truthful witness?
Minister.
Well, first of all, can I extend my welcome to the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, to her place. And can I say also, as someone who started her working life on the front line of social care, and someone who's been a highly effective trade union representative, and someone who in this House has spoken passionately and movingly about the need for greater social mobility and education reform, it will be a pleasure, I hope, to work with her over the weeks and months ahead. As far as yesterday's testimony went, people will make their own judgment on everything that was said then. I'd say only two things. I've worked closely, and it's been a privilege to work closely with both the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Health over the course of the last 12 months. They've given unstinting service It's thanks to their leadership that, for example, we have a world-beating vaccination programme. It's a privilege to serve alongside them. I think the Prime Minister is doing a fantastic job, and I also think the Secretary of State for Health has shown unstinting...
Order. Can I just say, topical questions are short and punchy. They're not for making statements. And of course, we all welcome the honourable ladies to the front bench, but we really do need to get to the answer to what's been posed. Angela Rayner.
I thank the Minister for his comments, but learning the right lessons could save lives, and the truth matters to us all. So can he tell us which, if any, of the claims made by Dominic Cummings he is now prepared to refute at this dispatch box?
Minister.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to read all of the evidence that was given yesterday, and indeed the Speaker has enjoined brevity on me, but I think that the inquiry that we've been discussing previously, the public inquiry, is the right place to review all the evidence from every individual.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone, no matter where they grow up, should have access to the same opportunities in life. Can my right honourable friend confirm that a key part of the Levelling Up agenda will be to improve teaching and provide support for schools and skills programmes in disadvantaged areas to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential?
That is exactly it. He is completely right.
Just come on.
Mr. Speaker, there are real concerns that bereaved parents who lost their children to the contaminated blood scandal could be omitted from future compensation packages for victims, as they were with the ex gratia payments. Please will the Paymaster General meet with me, I've written to her, and the Smith family who tragically lost their son Colin, aged just 7, after he was infected with blood from Arkansas prison. This is about acknowledging their loss. It's the very least they deserve, given the injustices that they have endured.
Minister.
We say I'd be very happy to meet with the Honourable Lady and any of the victims of this appalling scandal. At the recent APPG meeting, I did raise this issue, and I wanted to let all of those people that have lost children know that just because we published the WMS, which made reference to other support for other individuals, does not mean that they are not at the forefront of our minds. And the compensation study that we recently announced will obviously be looking at many of the issues that they have raised, but I'd be happy to meet.
Chris Craig.
Mr. Speaker, following Lord Pickle's report securing the ballot, I did a 10-minute rule bill to support the introduction of voter ID. So would my right honourable friend do all he can to ensure that this is delivered by the local elections next year? Furthermore, he can be reassured of the support of Bolton West's vibrant LGB, trans, BAME, working class communities for this effort because they, which may surprise Labour, actually participate in the modern world?
Minister.
It's a great 10-minute rule bill. Bolton West is a wonderfully vibrant and diverse community. It's got a brilliant local MP, and we're on it.
They got promoted. Abdul Khan. Abdul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Conservative Party finally published the much-delayed Singh report into Islamophobia and discrimination within their own ranks. Whilst the report is a damning indictment, the findings come as no surprise. The poison of Islamophobia continues to rise unabated in our society, and the latest hate crime figures reflect this. And yet, for years, the government has refused to meaningfully engage with the Muslim Council of Britain. So will the Minister correct this and meet with MCB and I to discuss what action is required to truly root out Islamophobia from our society?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point, and the Singh report, which I have not read every word, nevertheless is clear about the steps that we need to take in order to root out anti-Muslim prejudice, and it's absolutely critical that we do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's inevitable that as we continue to unlock, we will see the odd pocket of COVID hotspot and variants perhaps spread around the country. So will my right honourable friends say now that wherever possible, we will try to use local, well-communicated regional measures to suppress those hotspots, thanks to the fantastic vaccination rollout, so that we can avoid at all costs delaying the roadmap and also ensuring that we keep away from national restrictions.
That's a very thoughtful point with which I completely agree.
Let's go to Deirdre. Deirdre.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I must start by congratulating the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for being one of the few ministers in the thick of things to somehow avoid being mentioned in Mr. Cummings' evidence to committee yesterday. But the About Us section on the Cabinet Office website starts, "We support the Prime Minister and ensure the effective running of government." Given what Mr Cummings said about the chaos at the heart of this government, will he commission an independent inquiry into the operation of the Cabinet Office during the pandemic?
Minister.
Well, the broad public inquiry that we have set up with a consultation, of course, with the First Minister of Scotland, I hope will look at every aspect of our pandemic response. And while I didn't hear all of the evidence yesterday, I do understand that I was mentioned and the point was made that I got some things wrong. I've got lots of things wrong, but of course we will reflect on those in due course.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend has earlier highlighted how levelling up is central to the government's agenda, but I've seen it portrayed as a north-south question, and it isn't. No. There are left-behind communities right across the United Kingdom, and then there are left-behind pockets within communities such as towns and cities, which would equally qualify. So can he confirm that he's working right across government, all departments, to ensure that the commitment to levelling up is reflected right across the UK in their policy agendas?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we heard earlier from the member for St Austell about the particular challenges in Cornwall. The challenges exist across the United Kingdom as part of our levelling up drive, which we're committed to meeting.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you. The Chancellor of the Duchy knows that politics is a question of priorities, yet the government have insisted they simply cannot find the money to give our NHS heroes anything more than a 1% pay rise. But in the past year, the same government has spent £250 million on unusable face masks, £133 million on faulty testing kits, and £2.6 million on a briefing room at number 10. The government's priorities are all wrong, aren't they, Minister?
No, I don't think so, but I think he does raise an important point. I think that we should thank those at the front line of the NHS for the amazing work that they've done. Part of supporting them is making sure that they have the right personal protective equipment. This government, like governments across the globe, was under great pressure to make sure that we had the right PPE in the right places at the right time, and more than 99% of the PPE we procured was directed, usable and effective.
Holly Mumbycroft.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that the UK steel sector is interconnected, and removing steel safeguards on certain products could affect UK steel businesses and jobs. At this really crucial time for the UK steel industry, will he outline what steps his department is taking to promote the use of our world-class UK steel in government projects and down the supply chain?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very important point, and there's a proud tradition of steelmaking in Scunthorpe, and she's absolutely right to draw attention to the importance of this issue. My colleagues in Bays have established a new joint industry and governmental steel procurement task force, which was launched on the 12th of March. And of course, as the government department that helps to coordinate procurement, we're working with them to achieve the goals that she quite rightly points out on behalf of her constituents.
Let's go to Debbie Abrahams. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I was rather taken aback by the Minister saying the government is doing all that they can to support small businesses earlier. The collapse of the construction giant Carillion in 2018 saw 780 businesses go into insolvency. The thousands that survived average losses of over £140,000, including Neil Skinner, whose business is in my Oldham constituency. If the government had been implementing project bank accounts, this would have prevented many of these losses. So given this and the Minister's response to my written questions, why is the Cabinet Office no longer monitoring its extent of use of PBAs across government?
Minister.
Well, she raises a very important point, and I look forward to the opportunity perhaps to meet with her to discuss exactly how we can improve the way in which the Cabinet Office supports small businesses.
Alexander Stafford.
Mr Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows, I'm a strong proponent of the enormous new benefits that Brexit brings all of Yorkshire in terms of international trade and funding, which we see more and more every day. Will my right honourable friend give his thoughts on what Brexit means for Yorkshire in the long term, in particular what it means for Rother Valley?
Minister.
Well, Rother Valley is a centre of enterprise in South Yorkshire, and it contains brilliant businessmen like Mr Don Whiteman, who is a manufacturing superhero, and I know that he, like his Member of Parliament, recognises that the new trade opportunities that Brexit brings, and indeed the new opportunities for smarter regulation, mean that enterprises in Rother Valley and across Yorkshire have a very bright future.
Kevin Blunden.
Mr Speaker, perhaps he should have read the warning signs when Dominic Cummings used to sign in to his department as Secretary of State for Education
under the name Osama bin Laden. And that might have been the moment when he could have dealt with this issue. On his responsibility around public appointments, what's going on with the Ofcom chair? We read in the paper today, apparently, that the whole appointments process has been scrapped to be restarted again because Paul Dacre failed under the current rules, so they're being rewritten so he can reapply and be appointed a second time.
Minister?
Well, public appointments to Ofcom are, of course, a matter for the Secretary of State at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. I should say that the Honourable Gentleman would be a superb chair of Ofcom, given the range of experience that he brings. It would mean, sadly, he would have to stand down from his position in this House. But I think that we would all welcome that sacrifice for the greater good.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Mr. Cummings said the Prime Minister was not fit for office and been lying. Now, I believe and support the Prime Minister. Does the Chancellor agree that the Prime Minister is right, or Mr. Cummings?
Absolutely right. I think he's been doing a great job as the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And I think that if one just looks at the course of the last 12 months, everything we've done, from the rollout of the vaccine programme to the support that we've given those at the front line, I think we should celebrate the fact that at a time of challenge, we have in the Secretary of State at the Department of Health and Social Care a dedicated public servant.
Let's go to Caroline Oakes. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Changing Faces has convinced the Welsh Government to sign up to their pledge to be seen campaign, including people with visible differences and disfigurements in government publications. Will my right honourable friend consider doing likewise so that government information campaigns across the UK are as inclusive as possible?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a great champion of widening opportunity and has done a fantastic job in making sure that equality is taken more seriously across government. And the campaign that she outlines is absolutely right, and it is something that I will ensure in government publications we embrace.
I now suspend the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business. Before I call Jonathan Ashworth to ask his urgent question, I want to remind the House that Erskine May states that good temper and moderation are the characteristics of the parliamentary language. While the context in which particular phrase is used is important, Erskine May also says that there are certain expressions which, when used in respect of other members, are regarded with particular seriousness, generally leading to prompt intervention from the Chair and often require it on the member to withdraw the words. One example is making a charge of uttering a deliberate falsehood. In other words, members should not accuse other members of lying. Depending on the context, it may well be in order to quote the views of others, but members should not themselves state or imply that other members are lying. There are ways in such issues can be debated in the House by means of a substantive motion, but not part of an urgent question. I now call Jonathan Ashworth to ask his urgent question.
Ask the Secretary of State for Health to update the House on the pandemic preparedness of the Department of Health and Social Care.
I now call the Secretary of State for Health, Matthew Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, what we've done to handle this coronavirus pandemic has been unprecedented in modern times. Throughout, we have been straight with people and straight with this House about the challenges that we as a nation face together. The nation, in my view, has risen to these challenges. Of course, there were unprecedented difficulties that come with preparation for an unprecedented event. But, Mr. Speaker, this pandemic isn't over yet. Our vaccination programme has reached 73% of the adult population, but that means that more than a quarter still haven't been jabbed. 43% of adults have had both jabs, but that means that more than half are yet to get the fullest possible protection that 2 jabs gives. Yesterday, we saw 3,180 new cases of coronavirus, the highest since the 12th of April. But thanks to the power of vaccination, in which I have always believed, the link from cases to hospitalisations and to deaths is being severed. Around 90% of those in hospital in hotspot areas have not yet had both jabs. So the continued delivery of the vaccination effort and the ongoing work to control the virus through testing, tracing and isolation, these are vital. Yesterday, we saw the opening of vaccinations to all those aged 30 and above. And I'm delighted to tell the House that the vaccination programme is on track to meet its goal to offer a jab to all adults by the end of July. And, Mr. Speaker, it has met every goal that we have set. Because setting and meeting ambitious targets is how you get stuff done in government. We have many challenges as a nation still to come. I know, and one of the things I've learned, is the best way through is to work together with a can-do spirit of positive collaboration. The team who have worked so hard together to get us this far deserve our highest praise. I am proud of everyone in my department, all those working in healthcare and in public health, the armed forces who fought on this home front, the volunteers who stood in cold car parks with a smile, colleagues across the House who have done their bit, and most of all, the British people. And whether it's the science or the NHS or people queuing for vaccines in their droves, Britain is rising to this challenge. We have come together as one nation and we will overcome.
Senate Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Mr. Speaker, families who lost loved ones will have noticed that the Secretary of State, in his opening remarks, did not respond to any of the specific allegations from yesterday. Allegations which are grave and serious. That the Prime Minister is unfit for office, that his inaction meant tens of thousands needlessly died. Allegations from Dominic Cummings that he specifically is accused of misleading colleagues. An allegation from Mr. Cummings, Mr. Speaker, on our preparedness and lack of protection for people in care homes. Now, these allegations from Cummings are either true, and if so, the Secretary of State potentially stands in breach of the Ministerial Code and the Nolan Principles, or they are false, and the Prime Minister brought a fantasist and a liar into the heart of Downing Street. Which is it? Families who have lost loved ones deserve full answers from him today. Is he ashamed that he promised a protective shield around care homes and over 30,000 care home residents have died? Why were 25,000 elderly people discharged from hospitals into care homes without any test? Did he tell Downing Street in March that people discharged from hospital had been tested, even though it wasn't until 15th of April that there was a requirement for testing to take place? In public, he has often claimed that little was known of asymptomatic transmission at the time, so testing wasn't necessary. But Sage in January flagged evidence of asymptomatic transmission. A study in The Lancet in February flagged it. On March the 5th, the CMO said there may well be a lot of people who are infected and have no symptoms. So why didn't he insist on a precautionary approach and test all going into care homes? On 6th of May at the dispatch box, he claimed that it is safer for them to go into a care home. 12,000 people had died in these early months. How could he justify that comment? In April, he told the House that what is important is that infection control procedures are in place in that care home. But care homes, like the NHS, struggled with the most desperate of PPE shortages. And he was telling us in March from this dispatch box that supplies were extensive, but apparently in private in Downing Street was blaming Simon Stevens for lack of PPE. But the reality is him and his department was responsible for PPE, and the NAO report said the supplies were inadequate. 850 healthcare workers died. How many could have been saved had they had PPE? Families loved lost ones and have been let down by this government, this Prime Minister and this Health Secretary. But the truth matters. These families and the country deserve clear answers from the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister today.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These allegations that were put yesterday and repeated by the Right Honourable Gentleman are serious allegations, and I welcome the opportunity to come to the House to put formally on the record that these unsubstantiated allegations around honesty are not true, and that I've been straight with people in public and in private throughout. Every day since I began working on the response to this pandemic last January, I've got up each morning and asked, what must I do to protect life? That is the job of a health secretary in a pandemic. We've taken an approach of openness, transparency, and explanation of both what we know and of what we don't know. I was looking at it this morning. Since last January, I've attended this House, Mr. Speaker, over 60 times. With the Prime Minister, we have together hosted 84 press conferences. I've answered 2,667 contributions to this House and answered questions from colleagues, the media and the public. And we'll keep on with this spirit of openness and transparency throughout. As well as coming to the House today, I'll be answering questions and hosting another press conference later. Now, sometimes what we've had to say hasn't been easy. We've had to level with people when it's been tough, when things have been going in the wrong direction. And also, we have learned throughout. We've applied that learning both to tackling this pandemic and making sure that we're as well prepared in the future as possible. But beyond all this, what matters remains the same. Getting vaccinated, getting tested, delivering for our country, overcoming this disease and saving lives. And that is what matters to the British people.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House should know that when at yesterday's joint Select Committee hearing, serious allegations were made, we asked for evidence to be provided. And until such evidence is provided, those allegations should be treated as unproven. In the meantime, we are in the midst of a pandemic and we need the Health Secretary to be doing his job with his customary energy and commitment. So I want to ask him about comments made this morning by Neil Ferguson on the Today programme. He said that the Indian variant is now dominant in the majority of local authority areas and indeed is the dominant variant of the virus, and that June the 21st as an opening date was now in the balance. Given how desperate businesses are up and down the country to return to normal, what additional measures can he take in the short term to make sure, in terms of surge testing, in terms of the vaccine rollout, in terms of improvements to test and trace, that we really are able to open up, as everyone wants, on June the 21st?
State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, it is true that the Indian variant is spreading across the country, and estimates vary as to what proportion of the new cases each day are the variant first identified in India, which is more transmissible. Now, my assessment is that it is too early now to say yet whether we can take the full step 4 on the 21st of June. Like him, I desperately want us to, but we will only do that if it's safe. We will make a formal assessment ahead of the 14th of June as to what step we can take on the 21st, and in that we will be both driven by the data, we will be advised on and guided by the science, and we will be fully transparent both with this House and with the public in those decisions. That's the approach we've taken, that's the approach he and his Select Committee would expect, and it's what we'll deliver.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Martin Day. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Dominic Cummings' opening statement yesterday, he said that the truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisers fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this. When the public needed us most, we failed. We then heard a litany of evidence that the disease wasn't taken seriously in February last year, further compounded by the ignoring of sage advice in September to lock down and resulting in a worse second wave. Does the Health Secretary agree that the UK government failed the public? And had he acted sooner, how many lives could have been saved or restrictions could have been avoided? Will he act urgently to prevent further unnecessary suffering and death in our immediate future by holding a comprehensive public inquiry immediately?
State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I've been working on this pandemic since January of last year. That's when we began work, before the disease was even evident in this country. That's when we kicked off work on the vaccine. I was told at first that it would typically take 5 years to develop a vaccine, and I insisted that we drove at that as fast as we possibly could. And I'm delighted at the progress on that we've been able to make. Of course, it is right that we learn from everything that we understand and everything that we see and all of the scientific advances. We should do that all the way through. This idea that we should wait for an inquiry in order to learn is wrong. But of course, it's also right that at the appropriate time, we then go through all that happened in order to ensure that we're as best prepared for the inevitable pandemics of the future.
Let's go to Sherilyn McCrory. Sherilyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for his visit to the Royal Cornwall Hospital in Truro earlier this week, where we met with staff and toured the site of the new oncology wing, and also looked at the state-of-the-art plans for the new Women and Children's Hospital, one of our 40 new hospitals manifesto promise. Given the gravity of the situation the government faced at the beginning of the pandemic, and considering we now know there was a hugely disruptive force in the form of Dominic Cummings, I'd like to congratulate ministers, not least my right honourable friend, for staying focused on the evidence presented by the experts at the time as events changed quickly. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he will ignore unsubstantiated Westminster gossip and stay focused on delivering the vaccine rollout and our manifesto promises?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think that's what the public expects us to do. I had an absolutely brilliant visit to Cornwall on Monday of this week, and it was a pleasure to go to Trelisk and to see my honourable friend there and to talk about the new Women and Children's Hospital that we're building as part of the biggest ever investment in healthcare in Cornwall. It's delivering on these priorities on which we were elected and, of course, dealing with this pandemic and keeping people safe. That is what the public want to see, it's what the expectations of the public are, and it's my total focus.
I've withdrawn, so we go to Mike Wood. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was no manual to guide governments going into this new global pandemic.
but most people feel the government responded as well as anybody could. In particular, over the last 6 months, government has worked well together to deliver a phenomenal amount of testing and one of the best vaccine rollouts in the world. Is the Secretary of State aware of anything that's changed during that time to help the way the government has worked on improving the COVID response?
So stay.
Well, I think all I'd say to my honourable friend is that it is very difficult responding to an unprecedented challenge of this scale. But I think that over the past 6 months, people have seen that governing has become a little easier and we're being able to deliver.
Let's go to Yasmin Qureshi. Yasmin.
Mr. Speaker, in February, I called for localised community-based vaccination centres, and I want to pay tribute to Dr. Helen Wall, Bolton CCG, NHS, and the volunteers for the rollout of the vaccine. Last week, my constituents were wrongfully accused of vaccine hesitancy, and then we had a quasi-lockdown that no one knew about, and many people's travel plans were thrown in chaos. My constituents can forgive the government for that, but I am sure that I speak for the country when I say that we cannot forgive tens of thousands of people who died and didn't need to die. The chilling words of Dominic Cummings. Will the Secretary of State tell me, when will the Prime Minister and others be investigated by the police for alleged corporate manslaughter? And why did we not follow the example of New Zealand, where they managed to control it without a minimum of number of deaths?
No, Mr. Speaker, but what I would say to the people of Bolton is that the people of Bolton have again risen to this challenge. The number of vaccinations happening in Bolton right now is phenomenal, tens of thousands every single day. And it is heartening to see the queues of people coming forward, both for testing and for vaccinations in Bolton. This has not been an easy pandemic anywhere, but it's been especially difficult in Bolton. And I in particular want to pay tribute to the leadership of Bolton Council and Councillor David Greenall, who's done such a remarkable job in very difficult circumstances.
Let's go to Selene Saxby. Selene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my right honourable friend for visiting North Devon District Hospital this week, where he personally thanked the wonderful staff and discussed future development plans. Whilst this government has worked tirelessly to save lives, protect our NHS, Labour have spent the last year flip-flopping over curfews, lockdowns, schools and our borders. And I'm sure my right honourable friend shares my disappointment that even now the party opposite is still more interested in playing politics than working constructively with us. So can I seek his reassurance that as we emerge from the pandemic, he is committed to lowering NHS waiting times and improving access to vital GP services as he continues to make sure that everybody who needs care gets care?
Secretary of State. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely I am, and GP access in particular is very important. And this morning I met with the British Medical Association and the British Medical Association GP leadership to talk about what more we can do to strengthen access to GPs. These are the sorts of things that matter to our constituents, as does the new hospital that we're going to build in my honourable friend's constituency. It was a wonderful visit earlier this week on Tuesday in Devon, and it's been great going around the country looking at what we can do to further invest in the NHS, to strengthen our NHS, to support our NHS to deliver better care. And North Devon doesn't have a better champion than the Honourable Lady. As for what she said about the opposition, all I can say is that sometimes the Right Honourable Gentleman has constructive criticism. He's generally had a good crisis, and maybe he'll return to that approach soon.
Munira Wilson. Munira.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Quite the opposite of putting a shield around them, we sent people with COVID back to the care homes. These were the words of the Prime Minister's former chief advisor yesterday. If true, this is one of the biggest scandals and tragedies of the pandemic. So can the Secretary of State please confirm when testing on discharge from hospitals into care homes was routinely offered, and will he apologise to the tens of thousands of bereaved family members whose relatives died in care homes?
Secretary of State.
Well, it has been an incredibly difficult time for those who work in and live in care homes throughout this pandemic. That's been true across the world. And I want to pay tribute to the staff who work in social care who've done so much. It was, of course, a difficult challenge, especially at the start when many characteristics of this virus were unknown. And as I've answered many times in this House, we have published the full details of the approach that we take and that we took. And we worked with the care home sector as much as possible to keep people safe. And we followed the clinical advice on the appropriate way forward.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I take the Secretary of State back to something he said in his statement, which I think actually is going to be of the most concern to my constituents and the country in the days and weeks ahead, which is what he said about the B1617.2 variant first discovered in India. Now, we're bound to see an increase in cases as we open up. That is inevitable. But the important thing is breaking that link between cases, hospitalisation and death. My understanding of all of the evidence that currently exists is that the vaccines we have are very effective in stopping serious disease, including with that B1617.2 variant. Now, if that remains the case, then on the 15th of June, does he agree that there would be no reason why we wouldn't be able to open up fully on the 21st of June? That's the important question to which we need an answer.
That is literally the most important question, to which we do not yet have a full answer. The data that we have is that in the hotspot areas, around 1 in 10 of those in hospital are people who've had both jabs. But that is, of course, a function both of the protection that you get from the vaccine against this variant and also of the age profile of those who are catching the disease. And those who haven't been vaccinated include those who are old enough to have been offered the jab and those who have not yet been offered the jab. Now, the fact that 90% are people who have not yet been double vaccinated gives us a high degree of confidence that the vaccine is highly effective, but it also shows the fact there's 10% who have been double vaccinated that it isn't 100% effective. We already knew this, but we're better able to calibrate as we see these data. We will learn more about this over the forthcoming week or two before we make an assessment and publish an assessment ahead of the 14th of June about what the data is saying about taking the step that is penciled in for not before the 21st.
Jim Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for all that he has done to deal with the coronavirus disease and also for the rollout of the vaccine. Mr. Speaker, my mother-in-law died last year during the coronavirus. On the Monday she was taken to hospital and 5 days later we lost her. Now, we don't blame anybody, Mr. Speaker, and I want to put that on record. But we do miss her every day, and we continue to do so. I just want to ask the Secretary of State this: there are others who have questions, and there are others who have questions that they need answers to in Northern Ireland. And I just want to ask the Secretary of State this question: our Prime Minister has committed himself to an inquiry. The Secretary of State has committed himself to that inquiry. And I want to ensure that those people from Northern Ireland who have lost loved ones and have questions, sincere questions, not to blame anybody, Mr. Speaker, but just to ask the questions and get those answers. Can he assure us that people from Northern Ireland who have those questions can and will be part of that inquiry? Thank you.
Secretary of State. Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that he, like me, will welcome the fact that this morning Northern Ireland has been able to open up vaccination to all adults over the age of 18, showing the progress that we're able to make, working together with the UK vaccination programme and the local delivery through the Department of Health and Social Care in Northern Ireland. On the question of the inquiry, of course the inquiry must and will cover the entire United Kingdom. And in the 3 nations that have devolved administrations, of course, it will have to cover the activities both of the UK government and of the devolved responsibilities. Exactly how that is structured is yet to be determined and will be done in consultation with the devolved administrations. But as he rightly says, it is vital that we use the inquiry to ensure that people can ask questions and get answers in all parts of this United Kingdom.
Let's go to Derek Thomas. Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all everyone recognises there's lessons that can be learned as a result of this pandemic, and we don't necessarily need to wait for the inquiry to take place. Would the Secretary of State share my view that integration of health and social care is critical, is something that would absolutely be a lesson to be learned from the pandemic? And I was so delighted to welcome the Secretary of State to the Isle of Scilly on Monday, the first, we understand, of a health visitor of any time, and Health Secretary. So will he affirm the model that we're developing on the Isle of Scilly to integrate health and social care, improve the outcomes for everyone living on those islands, is right for those islands, but also a model that could be used elsewhere across the United Kingdom?
So say.
Yes, absolutely. It was an enormous pleasure to go to the Isles of Scilly on Monday morning. I didn't know that I was the first Health Secretary ever to visit the Isles of Scilly, but frankly, it's so wonderful. I'd really quite like to be back before too long. The point that he makes about the integration of health and social care is happening on Scilly. It's important on Scilly, but it's actually a lesson for everywhere. And it's a discussion I was having with the new Conservative-led Cornwall Council as well, the first ever majority-led Conservative-led Cornwall Council. And the team there and on the Isle of Scilly are doing a great job at integrating health and social care, on Scilly in particular, where they need investment in their health infrastructure, the support because it is more remote than almost anywhere else. These things we will deliver, and what I can tell my honourable friend is that throughout the length and breadth of this country, we will invest in the NHS and we will integrate health and social care, and the Isles of Scilly could hope for no better advocate than him.
Right, let's go to Neil Hamby. Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's revelations have only served to reinforce what many have suspected. A tale of chaos, deception, dishonesty and failure, including the reckless suggestion of herd immunity and chickenpox parties. While so many watched aghast, the Secretary of State chose to respond to these very serious allegations by claiming he had been too busy saving lives to even bother. My enduring memory of the Secretary of State yesterday will be of him quite literally running away from his responsibilities. I want to focus my questions on one vitally important matter that emerged yesterday regarding deaths in care homes. Did the Secretary of State, as alleged, categorically tell Mr. Cummings and unspecified others that people would be tested before being transferred into care homes? And if he did not, why then was transfer without testing the adopted policy across England and the devolved governments, including Scotland? On the 17th of October last year, I asked the Secretary of State to consider tendering his resignation. Surely, if all of these allegations are substantiated, he must do so.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, so many of the allegations yesterday were unsubstantiated. And I think the point that, the most important point that the Honourable Gentleman just made was that the Scottish Government, with its responsibilities for social care, also had to respond to the same challenges and dilemmas that we did, as did other countries across Europe and across the world, when we were driving incredibly hard as one United Kingdom to increase testing volumes, and we successfully increased testing volumes, including through the important use of the 100,000 testing target, which had a material impact on accelerating the increase of testing. And because of this increased testing, we were then able to spread the use of tests more broadly. It was the same challenge for the administration in Edinburgh as it was here in Westminster. And the best way to rise to these challenges is to do so working together.
We have a line connection with Dr. Andrew Morrison, so we'll go straight to Caroline Lucas. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The families of the bereaved deserve better than the grotesque pantomime of the Cummings evidence session yesterday. At the very least, they deserve the publication of the internal lessons learnt review. My constituent, whose father died from COVID acquired in hospital, wrote to me to say that the refusal to release it is, and I quote, an insult to bereaved family members who in the midst of our own suffering are determined to prevent other families from experiencing the loss that we have. She's right, because the big question is not just about mistakes the government made last March, but why ministers never learn from those errors and continue on a path that risks lives and livelihoods. So he says he's being straight with the public in this House. So as continued government negligence risks a third wave of the pandemic, will he finally publish that review urgently, not least so that it can become scrutinised before restrictions are due to be lifted next month?
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we learn lessons all the way through, and we follow the scientific developments that teach us more about this virus all the way through, and then we will also have a full inquiry afterwards to make sure that we can learn further lessons for the future. The thing I didn't quite understand about the Honourable Lady's question is why she didn't refer to the single most important programme that is saving lives, which is the vaccination programme. And she should be urging her constituents and others to come forward and get the jab, because that is our way out of this pandemic.
It can be on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to this government and the vaccine task force led by Kate Bingham, it is Britain who's led the way in vaccinations, and Britain who has given so much to the world through our vaccination technology and innovation. Globally, over 1 billion jabs have now been given, most of those either Pfizer, Moderna or Oxford AstraZeneca, and it is this government that backed Oxford University with over £60 million of funding to give the gift of hope to the world. So can I thank the Secretary of State for his efforts and his remarkable achievements in this regard? And if I may ask him this, when does he think the T-side vaccine, Novavax, will be approved by the MHRA?
So, the last point is very tempting, but I will leave it to the independent regulator to make that decision and to determine the timing of that decision. But we're all very excited about the progress of the T-side vaccine, as he calls it, the Novavax vaccine. But he's also right to raise this point about vaccinations around the world. And this is a critical role that the UK can be very proud of having played. Because of the investment we made in the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine right at the start of this pandemic, and because of the way that along with Oxford University and AstraZeneca, we have decided together to make this vaccine available at cost around the world. And I can tell the House with an update that there have now been over 450 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine deployed around the world at cost. That is the single biggest gift to the world that we could make with respect to vaccines. It is because of the attitude that this government took, working with one of our greatest universities, working with one of our greatest industrial partners. It is another example of the big team effort that is helping, in this case, the whole world to get out of this pandemic.
Let's go to Mohammed Jassin. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In a PMQ in July, I raised the concerns of a care home owner in Bedford who was told as late as the 21st of May that if she refused to accept the return from hospital of a COVID-positive patient, they would be discharged to an unfamiliar home. I know the Secretary of State is desperate to dismiss Mr. Cummings' events on care homes, but to do so would mean calling the care home owner a liar. Who is responsible for these high numbers of unnecessary deaths? The Health Secretary or the Prime Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we've answered this question many times before, and what I'd add to those answers is that it's another example of constantly learning about the virus. As we learned the impact of asymptomatic transmission in particular, so we changed the protocols in care homes over the summer and put in place the winter plan that led to a greater degree of protection in care homes over the second peak. And we're constantly looking to make sure that we can learn as much as possible and work with the sector to help people stay as safe as possible.
Mark Logan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to the Health Secretary,
I'm a fan. Those are not my effusive words. They come from some of the highest levels amongst our health team in Bolton. Like colleagues on both sides of this House, we've been on countless calls with the Health Secretary, with upwards of 100 MPs on many occasions, and like today, he has taken the time to respond or come back after each and every interaction with helpful advice and solutions. I say this in private, I say this in public, and I say it in today's Times Red Box. That's a plug. These last 2 weeks, he has thrown the Health Department's kitchen sink at Bolton to help us through the recent variant-driven spike. Can he provide an update on the current situation, as well as giving continued commitment to work hard for Bolton?
I presume it's your red box he refers to, Secretary of State.
Well, there are issues around Bolton in my red box very regularly, Mr. Speaker. I was waiting on tenterhooks to find out if, as well as his constituent being a fan, my honourable friend is a fan, and I'll maybe he can tell me later in private. But he makes a very serious point, which is that we have a significant challenge in Bolton right now. We have a high rate of COVID transmission, and we have done everything we possibly can to support Boltonians to solve this problem with increased vaccination, and it's great to see the huge enthusiasm for vaccination and the queues of people coming forward. And I would say to everybody in Bolton, please come forward if you haven't had both jabs yet. And secondly, the testing effort, which has seen people come forward and get tested and is helping us to break the chains of transmission. That is the approach that we're trying to take now that we've built this huge vaccine and testing infrastructure over the past few months.
Let's go to Matt Weston. Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State claims that he has always been straight, yet his response to my question last week suggests otherwise. Remember, he was not straight over the need for higher grade FFP3 masks for our frontline NHS and care workers. He was not straight over the need for the public to wear masks at the start of the pandemic. And he has not been straight over test and trace, such as his fabricated test numbers last April. Given yesterday's revelations, however, will the Secretary of State apologise to Warwickshire families for the 344 excess deaths resulting from his decision to discharge hospital patients directly into our care homes?
Secretary of State.
I don't recognise those figures, but I do recognise the enormous challenge of keeping people safe in care homes in the height of a pandemic, in unprecedented circumstances. But the other thing that I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, we are building one of the biggest testing laboratories that this country has ever seen, if not the biggest. And the ability to have this huge testing capacity is an asset that this country has, which will mean not only we can help tackle the virus now, spot the new variants, and make sure that we have an understanding of where it might be popping up, like, for instance, in Bolton, but also that we're better prepared in the future. And what I'd like to do with the Honourable Gentleman is work with him to deliver this brilliant laboratory in Leamington Spa, and to make sure that it is a model for how we do diagnostics for the future. And I think that, working together, is the best approach we can take.
We've got an audio only with Dr. Andrew Morrison. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How does my right honourable friend account for the yawning difference between the account given to the Select Committee yesterday and rehearsed by the opposition today, and the balanced and objective accounts that continue to be given by the National Audit Office on this pandemic, notably the one published earlier this month detailing the government's response to the pandemic? And can I ask him specifically how he will be taking forward one of the principal recommendations of that report, that we need to be planning for a sustainable healthcare workforce that can be organised at pace in the event that there is a future emergency of this sort, and particularly individuals who are properly skilled and updated to fill gaps that may arise as a result of a future pandemic?
He's quite right on both points, Mr. Speaker. Not only have we been transparent and accountable to this House and straight with this House about the challenges, but we have also welcomed the National Audit Office into government throughout this pandemic, and it has published repeatedly. For instance, it published on PPE, showing that we successfully avoided a national outage of PPE. It has reported on every aspect of the pandemic, and we have learned the lessons that are within those reports. And I recommend to the House the National Audit Office's latest publication, which summarise all of these lessons and learnings. And he's absolutely right that one of those is making sure that we have high-quality workforce planning for the future.
William Ragg.
Speaker, has my right honourable friend noted the various ironies of yesterday's committee? It must be personally difficult for him and others who needlessly defended someone so willing to throw them into the road, full of those presumably behind wheels of those testing their eyesight. But, Mr. Speaker, is not the greater irony, the strange epiphany in many who have gone from regarding the Prime Minister's former adviser as a latter-day King Herod, whose words and deeds could not be trusted, into a prophet who, fresh from the wilderness, brings with him supposed truths written on tablets of stone? Mr. Speaker, irony of ironies, all is irony.
Secretary of State.
I think, Mr. Speaker, what the constituents who we serve are looking for is a government that is focused foursquare on delivering for them, getting us out of this pandemic and building back better. And observations on ironies I will leave to my honourable friend.
Let's go to Chris Stevens. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delaying a public inquiry until 2022 could see the rewriting of memories, the potential loss of key documents, and a lack of the full transparency with the decisions that were taken based upon the evidence. Given the seriousness of the testimony of Mr. Cummings' comments, including the statement, the scale of the disaster is so big that people need to understand how the government failed them and learn from it. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that we need to now see a quicker start to a public inquiry than the government currently plans to?
Secretary of State.
No.
Right, so let's go to Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What do we know about the Secretary of State? Well, we know he's exceptionally hard-working, that every day he woke up to try and save lives. He's been exceptionally good at coming to this House and answering questions. He's also held press conferences and answered questions from journalists. And yet yesterday we had some outrageous claims by an unelected SPAD who broke COVID regulations, admitted he leaked stuff to the BBC, and by his own admission wasn't fit to be in number 10 Downing Street. Mr. Speaker, would the Secretary of State agree with me the only mistake the Prime Minister made in this pandemic is he didn't fire Dominic Cummings early enough?
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for that question, and I'll continue to compliment him whilst I think of how to respond. The honest truth is that from the start, I've been totally focused on how to get out of this pandemic. It is absolutely true that the operation and functioning of government has got easier this last 6 months. And I think all the public can see that. And we are laser focused on getting through this, getting this country out of it, delivering that vaccine programme, which we've now been working on for almost a year and a half, which is remarkable. And I pay tribute to all those who've been working on this effort. The way to fight a pandemic is by bringing people together and inspiring hope.
Yeah. Let's go to Rushanara Ali. Rushanara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 519 residents in my borough of Tower Hamlets lost their lives to COVID. In my own family, we lost 5 of our relatives, and their family members are grappling with that loss to this day. The hearings yesterday were incredibly distressing. Mr. Cummings has admitted to government failures in handling the pandemic and said it meant tens of thousands of people died who didn't need to die. Out of respect to those families, the over 128,000 families who've lost their lives, will the Secretary of State admit to the failures today and apologise? And will he, instead of a simple no to the earlier question, will he bring forward urgently the date for the inquiry? Because families like ours and my constituents and all those who've lost loved ones up and down the country deserve answers now, and they deserve for lessons to be learned so that these mistakes are never made again.
So say,
Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has taken far too many people away far too soon, and that's happened in her family, and it's happened in mine. And she's absolutely right that we need to ensure that we learn as a country how to prepare as well as we possibly can for pandemics in the future, because it is likely that pandemics will become more frequent, not less. And it is vital that people have the opportunity to get answers. And we must learn the lessons all the way through, not just wait till afterwards. And we must have a full inquiry afterwards so that we can ensure that every detail is assessed and that everybody has the opportunity to ask those questions. And I think that is the right approach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday, I had the absolute joy of going to the Winding Wheel in Chesterfield and receiving my first vaccine. Will my right honourable friend thank all of the volunteers and staff at the Winding Wheel for what they have been doing? And can he tell me what monitoring has been happening at the Department of Health of an outbreak of opportunism and revisionism that seems to be spreading through opposition politicians? And if it helps, I have an idea of who patient zero might be for that outbreak. Captain Hindsight, if you will.
Be delighted my honourable friend has had his first jab. I didn't know he was old enough yet. But it is very important that you take decisions in government based on the information that you have at the time. And of course, afterwards, you can go and assess based on information you have afterwards. But you can only take decisions on the information that you have. And that's why an unprecedented crisis like this leads to unprecedented challenges. And what you have to do is tackle those challenges as best as you possibly can.
Let's go to Barbara Keeley. Barbara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the start of this pandemic, COVID-19 was seeded into care homes by a discharge policy which required care homes to take asymptomatic patients. A letter from Kent and Medway CCG to care providers dated 26th of March 2020 made clear they were asked to take such patients whether they had been tested or not. Yesterday, the Joint Select Committee inquiry heard that the Prime Minister was told by the Secretary of State that testing would be in place for these patients. So I'm asking quite specifically, did he know that the discharge process did not require testing? And did he sign off this policy, which led to thousands of avoidable deaths of vulnerable people and many deaths of care staff?
Secretary of State.
Well, I've answered this question many times, and the challenge is that we had to build the testing capacity. And at that time, of course, I was focused on protecting people in care homes and in building that testing capacity so that we had the daily tests to be able to ensure that availability was more widespread. That is at the heart of the importance of the then 100,000 target, and we're now up to a position where we have millions of tests available per day.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely, Mr. Speaker, it cannot be in anyone's interest, least of all those who are mourning loved ones, for the mob to descend and judge and preoccupy my right honourable friend. At this point in the pandemic, the government has made clear there will be a full public inquiry, and that is when hindsight can and should prevail. But now surely it is in all our interests that he gets on with his work, bringing his experience to bear, saving lives and carrying out this excellent vaccination programme. In which connection will he meet a cross-party delegation of West Midlands metropolitan leaders who are keen to work with him to deliver these common objectives?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, these are common objectives. The way my right honourable friend puts it is absolutely spot on, and I'd be delighted to meet with him and the West Midlands leaders to ensure that we can roll out the vaccination effort as quickly and effectively as possible in order both to save lives and get us out of this pandemic.
Let's go to Barry Sherman. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Secretary of State aware that, by and large, many of us have been in the Parliament for a long time, prefer select committee inquiries to public inquiries because we get a faster and sharper look at a problem while the evidence is fresh. But can I say that he, I know, has been very good at coming back quickly to members of Parliament, and myself in Huddersfield, in Kirklees. Last week wasn't as good as possible. He didn't give a heads up, or it seemed didn't give a heads up, and we were very much taken aback by the new advice given to local authorities like mine. But one last point, the fact of the matter is these pandemics, these viruses haven't gone away. And the disturbing thing that came out of yesterday's evidence was there seemed not to have been any national plan in this sort of emergency. Every local authority has an emergency plan. Have we now got one?
Well, of course, we've learnt a huge amount about how to respond to a pandemic, and we built assets and capabilities like the vaccination programme, like the testing, which is so important both to protect people directly and break the chains of transmission and to understand where the virus is spreading. And I'm glad that we cleared up the issue that he raised with respect to Kirklees, and I worked with colleagues in Kirklees and elsewhere whilst I was in the West Country to make sure that we got the best possible solution to the need in Kirklees to have turbocharge on the vaccination programme, to have mass testing to break the chains of transmission, and for people to be cautious and take personal responsibility as we lift the measures to make sure that things stay under control. And I'm very grateful to him for what he said about me personally, and I'm very grateful to him for the leadership he's shown in his community.
Let's go to Dr. Luke Evans. Luke.
Yesterday, our committee was supposed to be about lessons learned, and in that spirit, we know that the World Health Organization on the 14th of January stated there's no human transmission. On the 11th of February, the WHO actually named the virus. We then know that on the 14th of February, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control in update number 4 stated that the risk to health systems in the EU and the UK was low to moderate and the risk to the population was low. We also know the UK had a plan, but it was mainly based around flu, not brand new viruses. Now, obviously, look where we are now. Isn't the biggest lesson learned is that we need a global response and a global resilience plan? So will the Health Secretary be pushing the Prime Minister to make this case at the G7 when we host it here in the UK in June?
Thank you very much. I think that is one of the lessons. I don't need to push the Prime Minister on this. He's absolutely seized of the point. And we will be developing the work on this next week at the Health Ministers G7 that is being held in Oxford. And then, of course, at the Leaders Summit being held in Cornwall later next month. My honourable friend is absolutely right in the view that he takes as to the importance of reforming and strengthening the global institutions as well as learning the lessons here at home.
Patrick Ready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He spoke earlier about the donation of surplus vaccines and other PPE and medical equipment to India and other developing countries. How does that square with the government's determination to cut its overall contribution to international aid? Is those donations being counted towards the 0.7 or the 0.5% targets? And can you assure us that if it is, that's not going to be to the detriment of other projects that were already committed that are towards those targets?
Of course, we're donating items directly, for instance, to India, to Nepal and others. But the single biggest global contribution that the UK has made is the Oxford vaccine, which is being delivered at cost by AstraZeneca around the world, following funding from Oxford and AstraZeneca and the UK government. That has already led to 450 million jabs globally, 2/3 of which are in lower and middle income countries. It's something everybody in all parts of this country should be proud of, and there was Scottish support in the development of that vaccine as well. Of course, we'll do as much as we can within the ODA budget directly, but that decision to waive the IP charge has been called upon from others, from President Biden down, but it's something that we in this House and the whole country should be very proud of.
Final question, Steve Bryan.
Thank you, sir. The vaccine rollout is going really well in my area, and I can't help but note the turning of the tide against COVID, exactly because of that rollout, seemed to exactly mirror the turning of the year. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that far from the world being divided into people who are either useless or brilliant, and the British state failing at every turn, we have a government in this country that did its best and a public who came together, as always in the UK, when the chips were down?
Seriously?
My honourable friend served as a health minister, was a superb health minister, and has captured not just the spirit of what this country has been through in the last 18 months, but also the spirit of the debate today in this House. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that we work best when we work together. And we work together when we have a common mission. And the common mission has been tackling this virus. And it is absolutely true that we must always, always do that with an open mind to how we do it better in the future. But in my view, the attitude you need to take is one where you welcome people in and you take things forward in a spirit of positive partnership. That's how you get stuff done, and that's how we've made the progress we've been able to make.
Order. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements to be made for the next business. Order.